Dre'Mont Jones is looking to have a huge impact on the Baltimore Ravens for the rest of the season, being the team's new acquisition. And he had some thoughts on his new teammate, Lamar Jackson. We talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here on this game day, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. And as always, thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content and coverage. And today we're going to be diving into a lot, particularly when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens facing off against the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, it's week 10. It's huge. We're going to dive into all that. It's our game day edition of the show. But we're also going to dive into a conversation that Dre'Mont Jones had, being the newest Baltimore Raven, about his early thoughts on Lamar Jackson. I had a couple of comments, and then also I want to dive into Draymond in particular, what he can bring to the table, not just for this game, but for the rest of the season for the Baltimore Ravens. And then obviously we'll do our full game preview, Ravens offense and Vikings defense, and then Vikings offense and Ravens defense predictions. So if you're here after the game, you can check how right or wrong I was on my prediction. So that's always a fun thing. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Dre'Mont Jones, everybody's looking for him to make an impact for the Ravens this season. Obviously 4.5 sacks in his last 4 games with the Titans coming over to Baltimore. I'm pumped to see Dre'Mont for the rest of the year. He went on the Ryan Ripken show and kind of gave a lot of insight onto who he was, what the trade process was like for him, kind of introducing himself to Baltimore as he has over the past week since being dealt. But Ryan asked him about Lamar Jackson. I thought it was a really interesting answer that he gave. And look, he was honest about the fact that like he's only been there for a couple of days and hasn't really had a shot to get to know Lamar. But he also talked about what it was like playing against Lamar on the other side of things, and what it's like preparing and whatnot. And he said, quote, as an opponent, it was tough because he's fast and he could throw. So there's that too. So it's like, all right, well, try the best you can. 1, 2, 3 team. And he was, kind of laughing at the end of that. It was like, all right, well, yeah, okay. You kind of just got to hope that you can get him down, essentially, is what I kind of felt like Dre'Mont was saying there. But, you could tell the respect that Dre'Mont has for him from the opponent side of things. And then he said, quote, as a teammate, I don't know. I mean, I see him around the building. I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to him that much, but he seems like a great person. I see people talking to him. I do see the leadership and respect throughout the building for him. And I can guarantee once I get to know him, I'll like him. And I think that's really cool, especially like the part about I do see the leadership. We've talked about that a ton on this show for years. Lamar Jackson's leadership, how he has grown in that category. Lamar is someone who he's admitted that he's like, hey, is he the most vocal person in the world? No, he's not. But he's someone that he does show leadership, one, by example, but two, he has grown as a vocal leader. That has become kind of a part of who he is. Even with the stuff in the locker room getting taken out, like that's something that's gotten a lot of run, and that's been revealed that it's been Lamar's doing there. So, Dre'Mont, I guess, hasn't seen a Ravens locker room with all the fun stuff in it because Lamar took it all out before he got there. But kind of seeing and hearing Dre'Mont talking about that was really cool. And it's always fun to me to hear players who have played against Lamar talk about playing again. I mean, we talked about it, Terrell Suggs. We talked about Terrell Suggs yesterday. He had some powerful messages for both Lamar and the Ravens defense. And Terrell Suggs talked about how, when Lamar was a rookie, Terrell had to tell him to slow down because of the fact that, the quarterbacks that they were playing against weren't as fast as Lamar. Lamar was running the scout team. So it's those stories and things. And while Dre'Mont didn't necessarily tell like a story or give an example of something like that, the respect that the league has for Lamar, it is on full display. And I'm curious, hopefully Dre'Mont will be asked again at some point, about Lamar after he's gotten a little time to know. I mean, he's been there for less than a week. So he said he was more focused on just getting up to speed on things and focusing on all that stuff, which is great. That was also really cool to hear from him. And we've gotten a lot of cool answers from Dre'Mont, I think, where, he seems to be a guy that's an extremely hard worker and, just really wants to win, wants to play in a competitive football setting. Obviously wasn't getting that in Tennessee. And so here in Baltimore, not just for week 10, but for the rest of the season, he will have a chance to compete. The Ravens right now are 3-5, hopefully 4-5 after 1:00 Eastern time today. Once that clock hits 4, hopefully the Ravens have another one under their belt. But, it's going to be, I don't want to say on Dre'Mont's shoulders because I think that's pretty unfair, but the Ravens did bring him in to become a big part of their pass rush. We heard Zach Orr talk about the inside outside versatility and how, they all but planned to play him more on the interior than he was playing in Tennessee, which was pretty rare for him. He was taking a lot of his snaps on the outside for Tennessee. Obviously, he started his career as an interior defensive lineman, so that's something that, he can use to his advantage, but he's 281 right now, which is not small by any stretch of the imagination, but I am curious to see if they do play him, maybe not extensively, but they do have him play a decent role on the inside. Is he going to be able to hold up there, considering that, he's not an interior defensive lineman per se anymore? But he did talk about how he takes pride in that versatility, which I think is really cool as well. So I think that for Dre'Mont, the fact that the Ravens didn't acquire anybody else at the deadline outside of him and Alohi Gilman, and particularly in the pass rush, we did hear from Jeff Zrebiec of The Athletic that the Ravens were exploring an option of a trade for Bradley Chubb, which obviously did not get done at the deadline. So, if it was Dre'Mont Jones and Bradley Chubb, then, it would have been all right. Those two can come in, help bolster the pass rush. It'd be less pressure on Dre'Mont, but, he, along with the other guys on that pass rush, Kyle Van Noy, Mike Green on the interior, guys like Travis Jones, all those guys need to step up in a big way because we know the Ravens can get pressure when blitzing. They've been really good at it the last couple of weeks, but can they go out there and rush for? Dre'Mont Jones can do that. And so you can put him in a one-on-one situation. He has a pretty wide array of moves that I like. So he's a guy that can come in and do that because Baltimore, while they've been aggressive with the blitzes, you're not going to be able to sustainably do that come postseason time, assuming you do make it there. And they still have a long uphill way to go, long uphill battle before they actually do get there. So I think it's cool about Lamar with what Dre'Mont said, because, it's kind of a truth of like, all right, sometimes you just have to sit back there and go 1, 2, 3 team, try to stop them. Like it just, there's a strategy, but at the same time, Lamar can be the chaos master of, getting outside the pocket and those unscripted plays. So sometimes it is just like, all right, go and tackle him. That's the strategy. But it also is interesting to hear the perspective of like, yes, he can run. Yes, he can throw. But there's all this other stuff that, we've heard not just from Dre'Mont, but from other players as well that I think is really interesting when it does come to Lamar Jackson. And then again, like I think a lot of people with Lamar, there's a lot of outside hate for Lamar Jackson, like whether it be media or opposing fans or whatnot. But you can tell like the league respects Lamar Jackson, like players, coaches, executives. Like I know there was the whole thing with him with his contract, and that was disrespectful with how some of the owners and teams didn't want him and whatnot. And I guess that worked out in Baltimore's favor because they got to keep Lamar Jackson after he requested that trade. But regardless, like players have a high level of respect for Lamar Jackson. You hear it when, they do the top 100 lists or, how opposing coaches and players talk about him. Brian Flores went on for a long time about Lamar during his availability this week. So like you can tell that respect is there. And now I'm really excited for Dre'Mont that he can see the other side of Lamar Jackson as a teammate and can sit back there on the sideline and say, whew, I'm glad I don't have to tackle that man anymore. So hopefully Lamar can throw that ball and turn on the Jets today against the Minnesota Vikings. Coming up in the second part of the show, we will talk about the Ravens offense going up against that Minnesota Vikings defense and how each matches up with the other. So stay tuned. Plenty coming your way here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Mint Mobile. If you're still overpaying for wireless, it's time to say yes to saying no. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no overages, no hidden fees, no BS. I said yes to making the switch and getting premium wireless for just $15 a month. Mint makes it simple. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can even bring your own phone and keep your same number in context. Now, I love that you're getting the same quality service you had before, but for a fraction of the price. The setup is super easy. You kept your number, and then you're running in minutes. Ready to say yes to saying no? Make the switch at mintmobile.com/lockedonnfl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnfl. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent of $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on a limited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And the show is brought to you by Gametime. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping to checkout. It's frustrating. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price, plus all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I pulled up Gametime, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100. The app made it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seat before buying. I love zone deals too. You pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Moving right along on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this game day edition of the show. Appreciate everybody being here with me today. Spending a little time either before, during, or after the Ravens game, whenever you're watching or listening to this. We do have a lot of game day content for you. Obviously, we have a pregame episode like this each and every single week the Ravens play. But remember, be sure you check in for all the content we're going to have throughout the day. 1 p.m. for the game. We'll be live here. We'll be doing the watch along. We'll react to every single play of that game. Then right after that, we'll dive into the instant reaction stream, and then we'll do the Locked On Ravens squad show right after that with myself, Sam Njoku, and former Ravens receiver Kadri Ismail. So we have so much Ravens content and coverage for you here on Locked On Ravens on a daily basis. Of course, the regular show is Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time, and we have bonus episodes on the weekends when the headlines permit. So be sure you hit the like button, subscribe in video form, and subscribe and follow along in audio form as well. All right, Vikings and Ravens, man, this is a huge Week 10 matchup. Baltimore and Minnesota, both two very talented teams, two teams that struggled a little bit at the beginning of the season. And for the Ravens, it was more than a little bit, being 1-5, but they've seemed to have found their strides. Minnesota picking up a big win over Detroit last week, and Baltimore obviously on their little win streak here. We'll start with the Ravens offense against the Vikings defense, and I think that's probably the biggest storyline considering Lamar Jackson and Brian Flores will be matching up with one another. We all know that Miami 2021 game. We talked about it all last week because the Ravens played on Thursday night against the Dolphins in Miami. So Lamar, he got rid of that beast. He said, all right, I'm done with that. But now he has to face off against the mastermind behind it all again in Brian Flores. And again, Brian Flores had a lot of praise for Lamar Jackson over the course of his media availability this week. Baltimore's offense still a very deadly unit. They're the top rushing offense in the league at 5.2 yards per carry. They're the 13th best pass offense in the league, and that's still without Lamar Jackson, 6.3 net yards per attempt. Meanwhile, Minnesota's defense, they're okay. You know, it's kind of like the Bears game a couple weeks ago, honestly, where, you know, and the Vikings don't have as many turnovers as the Bears defense did, but the Vikings are just kind of average in terms of defense. The 16th rated rush defense and the 19th rated pass defense in the league in terms of net yards per attempt. Where Minnesota excels, obviously, is generating pressure through blitzes. They're one of the most aggressive teams in the NFL when it comes to that. They're the second highest blitz percentage team in the NFL. And with that, obviously, comes the top pressure rated team in the league right now. Hasn't translated to a ton of sacks necessarily. I mean, Denver's blowing the league away with 40 sacks. They obviously played on Thursday night as well and had a ton of sacks in that game. But Minnesota, they come in at 23 sacks. So it's not terrible. They're still in the top half of the league by a comfortable margin, but they, you know, it's okay there what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball. Minnesota, in terms of excelling, honestly comes from their conversion defense, where they're the 7th rated third down defense in the NFL. Just 35% of those opportunities converted for opponents. In the red zone, they're a top 5 defense. They're number 5, giving up 50% of those looks. So that's where it's going to happen. That's where I think the Ravens have to win. If they win in that area, I think that Baltimore is going to be all right, especially offensively. But what Minnesota essentially has really prided themselves on this year is they might give up a decent amount, not a terrible amount, but a decent amount of yards. They're going to find stops in big moments. They're going to force you into kicks, or they're going to stop you on third down and give the ball back to their offense. And we'll get to their offense in the final part of the show. But they do have quality players on that defensive side of the ball, and they really did a revamp of their unit over this offseason, particularly on the interior. Jonathan Allen comes in, Javon Hargrave comes in. They did the whole Jonathan Grenard for Hunter swap last season. Jalen Redmond has really stepped up for them. He's their sack leader with 4. You got to watch out for Eric Wilson as well. So they have a lot of guys that can do it. Dallas Turner, like their players there are good. Now, in the secondary, it's interesting because they do have players like Byron Murphy and Isaiah Rodgers as well. Their safety position, Harrison Smith is still there. He's still rocking out in Minnesota after all these years. But I think for Minnesota, their secondary, I think, is where Baltimore has to win. And they can do that in a couple of different ways. Obviously, I think that they can use their tight ends in this way. But I think with Baltimore, they've had problems challenging with heavy on heavy this season. It's going to be key. The offensive line is going to be massive. And, we did the episode on the Terrell Suggs comments yesterday with Lamar Jackson, and a lot of people were in the comments talking about Lamar, how can he run when the offensive line is so bad? And I get that. My comments about Lamar yesterday and, him doing more run stuff was not about designed runs for him. It was more off script plays where the offensive line is not a part of the equation. And, he can throw or run the ball when there's a run lane. And again, it hasn't been as big of an issue for Lamar this season. I know that last year with the whole Lamar, his mom cussed him out and everything like that. But, that was all at that Eagles game, he didn't run enough. And Lamar's mom said, you got to take those rushing lanes. And Lamar, he's like, all right, I'm going to do that. And then he did it. But the O-line is going to be the key here. So Lamar, when he cuts outside and there's no one open, he doesn't always have to force a throw in there if there's a rushing lane. He knows that. He's good about doing that. I think he's been a lot better at doing that ever since that Eagles game. But when there is design stuff for Lamar, and he's still kind of working back from his injury, I'm not sure how much the Ravens are going to put him in that situation anyway. So I'm not really expecting a big Lamar is going to run the ball 13 times for 100 yards in this game. But the offensive line has to protect and they have to block, right? That's the big thing for me, because you cannot allow this Minnesota defense to blow you off the ball like we've seen. But the problem is they're still trotting out that same personnel. I mean, why should I have confidence in Daniel Falele or Andrew Voorhees that they're all of a sudden going to flip a switch? Kaiser Ismail and I talked about that this week. We're like, are they finally going to get it after half a season of not getting it? I hope so, but I'm not really encouraged by what I'm seeing out there. Ronnie Stanley, he's getting blown off the ball at times. Linderbaum's getting blown off the ball at times, although Linderbaum hasn't been as big of an issue, and I think some of his poor play has been about who's been around him. Rosengarten's regressed. I mean, Patrick Ricard, I don't want to see him on his butt in this game. Hopefully, that's not what happens, because they're at their best when they can just blow the opposing defensive line off the ball, get Derrick Henry to the second level. If they can get their run game going early, get into second and shorts, third and shorts, Minnesota is going to have to step up. And what's the best way to combat a blitz? The short passing game. The short passing game is an extension of the run game. We saw a couple times on Thursday night last week where the Ravens blitz and the Dolphins, Tua just threw a swing pass out to Devon Achane, and there were 3 Ravens who were there because everybody else was so far up the field because they were blitzing. So when Minnesota brings that pressure, and they are going to bring that pressure, I think getting Keaton Mitchell involved in the short passing game, getting the ball out, running guys into the flat, all of that is going to be really important. You can run quick slants and try to throw the ball between 2 guys. All of that's going to be really important, because there's going to be a lot of one-on-one coverage, and there are probably going to be times where there are blown assignments and the guy goes wide open. And so I would actually like to see the Ravens get their deep passing game going a little bit early too, because I think that if the Vikings do play up, if they play man and they play up and press, I think that guys like Rashod Bateman or Zay Flowers, if they win quickly off the line and they run go routes or, deep outs or whatever it may be, in breaking routes, I think Lamar can find those guys. But it's going to be about combating the blitz, guys getting open quickly and giving Lamar safety valves, Todd Monken giving Lamar those guys in the flat. And identifying that, because we're going to see a lot of aggression from this Vikings defense. That's who they are. We're going to see it from the Ravens defense too. We'll talk about that in a minute. But for the Ravens, they need to get out ahead of that blitz, because if you give Minnesota momentum and they start feeling like, oh, this is how you beat Lamar again, like we saw in 2021, and this is a much different Lamar Jackson, a much different offense, a much different team. It's completely different. But we've seen that if you continue to blitz Lamar Jackson, he's going to beat it, especially recently. Like it's not easy to blitz Lamar Jackson and get away with it over and over and over again. That 2021 game is so far in the past. So it's going to be up to this offense to combat that blitz, blocking assignments. They're probably going to have to send extra protection in there to help tight ends, record, running backs, whatnot. Everybody has to be on point here if they want to win this game offensively. And coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about how the Ravens defense can put their stamp on this game against that Vikings offense that has a lot of skill position talent, but the quarterback is the question. So stay tuned. Plenty coming up on Locked On Ravens. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action. If you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I've been using PrizePicks during both football Sunday and NBA tip-offs. It keeps every game exciting. I like picking my favorite players like Lamar Jackson and Nikola Jokic to see how my predictions play out. And the new stacks feature is a game changer. You can now pick more on Steph Curry's points, threes, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves my lineup from a loss. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Continuing on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Sunday game day edition of the show. Ravens, Vikings, week number 10. Ravens need a big win here. Appreciate everybody for being here again. Be sure you also check us out on the watch along today, as well as the Instant Reaction Show and the Locked On Ravens Squad Show, where we're going to have so much game day content and coverage for you. We have so much Ravens content and coverage for you over here on Locked On Ravens. So we got the Locked On Ravens show, the regular show Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. We have the bonus episodes, everything. I mean, if you want some daily Ravens coverage, we have it here for you. Also, be sure to tell a friend and a family member that if they want that coverage, we have it here for them as well on Locked On Ravens. You can follow me on social media too at Chaosrecord34 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the whole 9 yards. All right, let's dive into this Ravens defense versus the Vikings offense. Let's start off with the base stats, as we always do. The Ravens right now have improved. They've improved as a defense over the last couple of weeks. They're now the 22nd rated rushing defense and the 25th rated passing defense in the NFL. So it's gotten better. You know, they were one of the worst scoring defenses in the league, if not the worst. They're now 24th. Same with yards, and now 27th. So it's been better. Meanwhile, for the Vikings, they come in and look, Carson Wentz has been their quarterback for the majority of the season. That's not the case anymore, with J.J. McCarthy now being back and stepping in. Vikings are 25th in passing offense, and they are 16th in rushing offense. So again, middling to not so great, but we know the Vikings have unreal skill position players: Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason. Like, they have dudes. Plus, their offensive line is now pieced a lot more back together than it was earlier in the season. Both their tackles are back. You know, their center, Ryan Kelly, still recovering from a concussion. But, you know, I think it all starts there for the Ravens, right? Generate pressure. Baltimore was a very non-aggressive team blitzing early in the season. They were right around 30th over the first couple weeks, maybe month of the season. As I've said on the show all week, now they have gone all the way up to 10th. They're top 10 in the league in blitz percentage now. So we've seen that aggressive style, but it's going to come down to winning one-on-ones. And the Vikings are also going to probably have some of those blitz beater plays as well. So I'm really curious to see how aggressive Baltimore is, how they use Dre'Mont Jones, for example, like we talked about earlier in the show. But it's also going to come down to guys like Mike Green. Can he continue some of the recent success that he's had? You know, what about a guy like Travis Jones, you know, being a game wrecker? The Vikings are going to try to take him out, and can other guys benefit off of that? Carl Lawson actually was not elevated for this game, which, you know, John Harbaugh made it about as clear as possible he was. So I don't really know what the deal is there. But Taven Bryan was elevated for this game, who has not really played all that great. It's his last elevation, I believe, before he has to be promoted to the active roster. I do not think they promote him to the active roster, but, I guess I've been wrong before, so it's possible. But the Ravens are going to have to get push up front, allow the Vikings to work probably with their bend don't break defense with some of the short and intermediate stuff. They're not going to want to get beat deep, but you have to do what you've done over the last couple of weeks, which is truly bend don't break, as opposed to what we saw earlier in the season, which was, they're bending and they're breaking. So Baltimore is going to have an opportunity here because I think the wild card is JJ McCarthy. We talked about all those skill position players, but JJ McCarthy, this is his technically second season, but he didn't play his rookie year. So it's really his rookie season. Hasn't really played a lot of games even during this year with everything going on. He's a guy that I think the Ravens, if they get pressure on him, get in his head, this should be a decently solid day for the Ravens defense. McCarthy made some really impressive throws against Detroit last week, and he's certainly going to be a player in this league, in my opinion, but you still have other areas where he's just a really young guy, and the Ravens typically have had success against these quarterbacks that are rookies or second-year players. So that, to me, is where the blitzing can come into effect. Even just bluff. I mean, maybe not the Don Martindale special where you're sending like 9 guys up at the line, you're sending all of them or dropping all but 3 back. But, making JJ audible, think at the line, who's coming, who's not, really try to confuse a young quarterback who hasn't really seen a lot of unique looks at the NFL level so far. I think that's going to be the bread and butter here. And historically, the Ravens generally don't lose a lot of these games to some of these guys who just don't have as much experience because of how unique and complex that defense is. And that, to me, is where you see some of the matchup skill position-wise, like Nate Wiggins and Justin Jefferson, or Marlon Humphrey and Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson and whoever's going to cover him. Like, if they can make sure to not allow anything super far down the field, I feel confident in the defense, which is really weird because I shouldn't. But they've shown me something over these past couple of weeks. The problem with that, though, is that there are still glaring holes and weaknesses that other better teams will exploit. But this team with Minnesota, it's all going to ride on JJ McCarthy. If he can get Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison the ball and the Vikings can run effectively, could be a long, more shootout-y type of day for the Ravens where it's Lamar versus JJ McCarthy or whatnot. But in a shootout with Lamar Jackson versus JJ McCarthy, I'm going to take Lamar Jackson. So the Vikings haven't really been that great of a team on third down or in the red zone either on offense. I mean, they've been like, a lot of that to do with Carson Wentz too, but they're 28th in the league on third down. So they're not good on third down. They're 21st in the league in the red zone. Now, Baltimore hasn't been exactly great on defense on either of those two as well. Baltimore on the year is, they've gotten better, but they're still 20th in the league on third down and 16th in the red zone. I think Baltimore wins this game. I think it could get ugly if JJ McCarthy really, really struggles, but you do have to respect the roster, especially up front that, Minnesota has put together. They've really upgraded there. So I'm going to go Ravens win this one. I'll say something along the lines of like 29-23, something along those lines. But if again, JJ McCarthy struggles, I could see that Vikings score being a lot lower than that. So I have confidence. I'm hoping they can roll off another win here. And we'll be back here on Locked On Ravens to talk about it all on the Instant Reaction Show. But we'll also be reacting to the game live, by the way. So be sure again to check in to everything we have going on. 1 p.m. watch along. We'll have the instant reaction after the game and the Locked On Ravens squad show. So thanks so much for tuning into the show today. We'll be back here soon on Locked On Ravens, reacting to everything Ravens and Vikings in Week 10. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.